Well, an effort to literally unearth the past is continuing this morning under the direction of the University of North Florida's Anthropology Lab at the Timucuan Ecological and Historic Preserve. Here to tell us more is lead researcher and grad student Victoria Hayes. Good morning, Victoria.
Good morning.
We're also joined by Chance Courtney-Durrett. He is a UNF archaeology student, excuse me, and a DIG participant. Good morning, Chance.
Good morning.
So, start if you would. I know that there's a lot going on out there this morning because there is kind of like a media event, and media are being welcome to this site. But this is not a new dig. You guys have been out there for some weeks. Can you just tell us, Victoria, first of all, loosely where you're operating and what it is that you're doing out there?
Yeah, so the site is located on National Park Service land. It's located on one of the islands within the Timucuan Ecological and Historic Preserve in Jacksonville, Florida.
Hmm.
We started this project last year, was the first field school out there. And throughout the site, there's a bunch of mounded shell heaps and arcs and ridges. So we're doing the first academic archaeology out there, so large scale excavating, and we're just trying to figure out where it dates to, who was living there, and what was happening there. So what we know right now is that it dated from the local St. John's II period, which is 940 to 1300 CE. And we're trying to see how that fits within the broader landscape of Jacksonville, Florida during that time and how the site was utilized.
And so UNF has done a number of digs and a number of sites in kind of the northeast part of the city, largely kind of in these coastal communities, these island communities, which is, also where this is located. But this dig is a little different because you're kind of going in with some new information that was gained through LIDAR.
Mhm.
Can you kind of explain for people who don't know what LIDAR is, how that worked, and what information you got from that has kind of driven this additional interest?
Yeah, so LiDAR stands for light detection and ranging. And how it's obtained is either through a drone or through a plane, and it shoots down these laser beams. And then the laser beams will reflect and shoot back up to the plane, and it gives an X, Y, and Z coordinate. So it gives the elevation and then the location of the point. And it'll shoot millions of points, and then you can generate that into a topographic map, essentially.
Hmm.
So we were reviewing the LiDAR within the area on the island that we're working at, and we noticed all of these formations that were very visibly mounded and elevated above the rest of the landscape. So we went out there to do just like a ground walking survey, and then we noticed that there's just massive shell heaps at this site that were very clearly anthropogenic and very purposeful.
And so that would be distinct, Chance, from some of the other sites. We're familiar, I think, generally with the idea of a shell midden, which is kind of like a repository that indigenous people left behind, which could have been almost like a dump, right? It would have been like oyster shells and some broken pottery and things like that. Um, what difference does it make, the idea that this is something that was possibly deliberately created? Um, what significance does that have when you're working on a site like that as somebody who's interested in anthropology?
It makes us try and look deeper into seeing if it is deliberate and why that might be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so what tools are you using in your excavation and your research out there?
So as a field school student, we're learning how to excavate properly and record while we're excavating because archaeology is a destructive process and it cannot be repeated. So when we're doing it once. So we have to
Oh.
keep very clear records of what we're doing as we're excavating and then also processing the artifacts in the lab. So we're learning lots of different hands-on skills for archaeology.
And I mean, it's slow going, I'm guessing.
Hmm.
And I know that you probably have some tree cover out there, maybe some little tents that you're putting up, but that's pretty hard work, I would guess, out
Yes,
there
it
all day
can
in the
be.
sun. Yeah.
Hmm.
What has that experience been like for you and your fellow students?
It's been really great. As someone who wants to get into archaeology, I think it's the best thing to actually be able to practice archaeology. So to really see what it's like out there, and it's been a very wonderful experience.
Yeah, I mean, it is. I guess there's nothing like kind of getting out there and doing it yourself. But Victoria, when you talk about this being a potentially, deliberate creation of an earlier civilization, there are some sites that people might be familiar with, like the Poverty Point in Louisiana, which is kind of these concentric circles that are built into the earth, or the mounds in Ohio. That are in shapes of actual things. So, what are the possibilities here? I mean, if this turns out to be kind of a deliberate construction and not just an accidental heaping of materials, what could it symbolize? What could it mean?
So I think what's interesting is that we have a kind of a dichotomy of what it's either a garbage dump or it's ritual, but it could be both. I think that that's a kind of a Western dichotomy that we're imposing onto it. I think it could very well be ritualization of the mundane.
Mm-hmm.
I think if they were gathering the oysters along the marsh, there's no reason for them to bring those all the way inland. So I think they're very purposeful for some reason.
Because these are inland relative to
hmm
the
There's
water line.
there's one along the marsh that's almost 200 meters in length, but there's also a bunch inland that parallel each other that are similar in shape and form and height, and they look very deliberate in how they're structured. So what I'm looking at is I'm starting to look at archaeoastronomy, and I'm seeing if any of these are aligned with any solstice events or any star alignments or any sort of astronomical events out there. I think that the moon phases would be really important to them because of the tides, and that would determine the best time to collect oysters, which is primarily what they were eating.
And so, I mean, you're, in the field of archaeology. Does this get you just really far afield and having to learn about this whole other science, things like astronomy, celestial patterns, lunar and tidal patterns?
Yeah, I think the one great thing about archaeology is it's very transdisciplinary.
Mm.
So you go into archaeology, but you can also get into geology if you're analyzing pottery at like a micro scale, and you can get into astronomy and astrology and all of this other stuff,
Yeah.
and physics and chemistry.
And so this dig that you're working on, Chance, does it change for you knowing that it could be something, I guess, I mean, at least of lay people would consider it of kind of greater consequence if it was something that was not just a happenstance of shell and debris, but actually something that was created with some figure in mind or some observance in mind.
If that is the case, it just definitely would make me think to be respectful and know the importance of this. And that's why to just do your best and just be very respectful of this and um, understand the importance of it,
That's
if that
interesting. I
is the
haven't
case.
really thought about, kind of how one might behave at a site where you're doing
Hmm.
an archaeological dig because there's just a lot of physical labor involved.
Yeah.
There's a lot of equipment involved. Is that something that you talk about in class or with other students about, just kind of what this site may have meant to someone?
Yeah, that is something that definitely should be understood and thought about.
Yeah. Um, for you, Victoria, knowing that this could be one thing, it might turn out to be something else entirely. I mean, this is sort of like the topic of your thesis, right? That you're
Yes.
working on.
Yes.
Um, So is it hard to approach it without some sense of expectation or hope that it kind of turns out one way or the other? How do you manage that as a scientist and as a student?
Yeah, so we have to be very aware of our own biases and try to avoid those as much as possible. One direction that archaeology is currently moving in, and the University of North Florida and the NPS has been a huge part of this as well, is moving to collaborate with indigenous nations and indigenous peoples. So I think that that helps with our biases is to run things through them as well to see their own perspective, get their personal perspectives and opinions on it.
Hmm.
So all of our research designs have not only been approved by NPS, but it's also been approved by the Seminole Nation of Florida. So I think that their opinions on things will also greatly influence how we perceive certain things as well. I think the indigenous voices are very, very important when you're studying indigenous history.
Yeah, I mean,
So
and that's a very responsible answer. And I guess I'm just sort of like wondering though, will you be kind of bummed out if it isn't, something that reflects a larger intent as opposed to just, something that doesn't?
I think that it would be interesting regardless because this site is unlike any of the other sites in the area that date to the same time period.
Mhm.
There's no evidence as of now that anyone was living there. So right now, our running theory was that it was a gathering place for the local communities, and it's some form of community cohesion where they were mass collecting and mass processing all of these shellfish.
It's fascinating. I look forward to getting an update. How long does this continue out there?
So it's a 6-week field school
Okay.
with a collaboration between UNF and the National Park Service. We're on week 5 right now, so next week we'll mostly be mapping and wrapping up excavating.
All right. Well, it sounds great. Chance, Courtney-Durrett, Victoria Hayes, good luck out there. Thanks so much for coming on today.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.